Years ago in a Bible study, we were talking about the concepts of light and dark and all of the meanings around those words and privileging one over another. And it was finally a wise eye surgeon who piped up and reminded us, our eyes can only see because of contrast. We rely upon the brightness and shadows and all the subtle tones in between to make sense of the world around us. John's gospel describes Jesus as, quote, light shining in the darkness. He is the light that disrupts the shadows and draws our attention towards God. And just as light and dark help us to see, the contrast between good and bad helps us discern what nurtures life and what diminishes life. We crave good news. We crave good news, especially when bad news dominates the headlines, and compounding our anxiety is the realization that one person's definition of good news could horrify the person sitting next to us. That's when we realize that at some point it becomes necessary to say, this is not good, it's not healthy, it's not life-sustaining. Now, the very word gospel means good news. And we have four gospel writers who begin Jesus' story by revealing him against whatever forces of the time was causing human lives to wither. In Mark, Jesus' first act is to cast out a demon. In Matthew, the first thing Jesus does is bless the poor and challenge the cycles of vengeance that kept them poor. In Luke, he stands in the synagogue and he proclaims release to the captives. Those three gospels are somewhat similar. We call them synoptics. They see the same way. And of course, John differs. In the Gospel of John, Jesus starts before time itself with the phrase and the poetry, in the beginning. It's a poetry, it's a song. It's a song that Jesus appears as divine light and one with God. Then Jesus appears at the Jordan River, is baptized, and calls his disciples, and the logical question is, for what? What comes next is the launch of his ministry and the launch of the good news. And before I read today's lesson, please pray with me. Dear God, we come before you accustomed to news that masquerades as good, and we give in to people who try to deceive us into thinking too little of ourselves and one another. So as we turn to this holy text, surprise us. Speak to us of good news so that we trust and we believe. Amen. I invite you to listen for God's living word as I read from the Gospel of John, beginning at the 2nd chapter. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to me and to you? My hour has not yet come." And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever it is he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. And Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the person in charge of the banquet." So they took it out. And when the person in charge tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, that person called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk, but you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Possibly you've danced the first dance. Maybe you've helped choreograph a bridal party's entrance, curated a playlist, or kicked off your shoes to celebrate at a wedding. Whether it's a ceilidh, a Scottish barn dance, I was intimidated to do that the first time, but it's just like the Texas two-step or the electric slide or the hustle. These are shared dances that gather the entire reception, young and old, friend and family, new people. These dances gather us all into one body. We sway to the music. We sing more loudly than we ever do in church. We float across the floor. We wave our arms to fully embody the joy of this new beginning. At this wedding in Cana, perhaps Jesus raised not only his voice, but the groom's chair in a dance called the hora. It's a dance still done at Jewish and often at secular weddings alike because it's fun. And it's a tradition to show the community's support for this new creation. That night in Cana, Jesus' mom interrupts the fun. We can imagine the music is so loud that it drowns out her voice, so perhaps she taps him on the shoulder and shouts, "They have no wine." Implicit in this statement is her belief that he can do something about it. He calls her not mom or even mother, but woman. That's a hint. Our English translation loses some of the sharpness that's really embedded in the reply. Woman, get off my back. Or woman, this is none of our business. Even though he tries to argue it's, quote, not my hour, his mom wins, and he steps up. He steps up to take the common element water, just plain water, and turns it into abundant, extravagantly delicious wine. Why? When John wrote this gospel, it was widely known that Cana resided in a territory invaded by a tyrant who sought any way to strangle life out of the community. And maybe 3 days into the celebration, the wine had truly run out because Herod's henchmen squeezed the supply lines, diverted the shipment, or doubled the taxes. Jesus' first sign in the Gospel of John points to God's life-giving goodness in even and perhaps especially the daily part of our lives, so that we are to know that whenever we feel threatened or fearful, God is there. It's not just off in the mountain or in the desert, it's everyday life. Now, John's Gospel calls the miraculous works of Jesus signs, because they always come from and point back to God. The signs draw us to believe that Jesus is from God, one with God. The signs draw us to believe that God so loves the world, God will turn our misery into abundant life. And the signs draw us to believe that through Jesus, God makes our earthly home a place for us to thrive, and through Jesus, God promises to bring us to a mansion of many rooms for our eternal life. Just a couple of things amongst the many to notice about this story of good news. John's Gospel launches Jesus' ministry with all of his humanity on display. Even Jesus, God's Son, needs to be prodded by his mom. He's not sure that his time has come. You can just imagine him saying, "Oh, Ma, can't I just keep singing and dancing with my friends? It's not time yet." Maybe he averts his eyes, looks at his feet, tries to step back from the problem, wishing that it's someone else's to fix. I don't know about you, but sometimes that happens to me. And she says, "No, now. You got to step up now." And his mom also knows that those men that he brought to the party will become more than just friends and buddies. The gospel very explicitly tells us from this first sign, they believe. They believe in the glory of God revealed through him, and they follow him. They follow him throughout. The first sign surprises us by God using something we consider ordinary, common water for something good. The first sign surprises us to show us how much God cares for the welfare of the community. The first sign surprises us that God's going to call us whether we're ready or not. And God shows us that what we find common, God can use us for a force of good. Time and again in human history, God moves through us. In our nation's history, we know that enslaved Blacks galvanized their community by using their voices to turn the air that they breathed into songs of liberation. They sang. That's the only thing they had, was the air and their voice, and they sang. And those songs taught people how to endure, how to communicate under threat, and most of all, to remember their dignity when everything about them tried to erase that. The music of the enslaved Americans remains a long part of our march towards justice and equality. 50 or so years later, after their liberation, in the year 1900, a choir of 500 school children celebrated President Abraham Lincoln's birthday by singing in public for the first time, "Lift Every Voice and Sing." They did so at a segregated school, but the world heard. This song's lyrics united people and their voices in a prayer of thanksgiving and faithfulness sung throughout the civil rights movement. You may have heard it sung at the Super Bowl just a couple of weeks ago. It's enshrined in our hymnal. Singing as resistance is remembered, and it's learned from similar movements and movements in our shared history. It's carried in our bodies that have learned across generations how to stay present with one another when fear is loud and the future is uncertain. Queer and gender-expansive musicians, they sing in marches, they sing in bars, they sing in jail cells, sanctuaries, and in places where they can organize voices because they know the script, they actually know the score. They united their breathing into human voice to turn common air into a movement to protect them and to persuade us of love. Just this month, people are using their voices, only this time it's plain white ordinary people in Minneapolis. Minnesota humorist Garrison Keillor once bragged that the Lutherans are bred from childhood to sing in 4-part harmony. I put this in here because I was raised a Lutheran and I still think about this. From the earliest age, you sit on the lap of someone singing alto or tenor or bass and you lean into their chest and you feel their body and the way in which harmonic intervals join and sing. The origin of Lutheran faith began 500 years ago with this song. And through this world with devils filled, should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God has willed his truth to triumph through us. Those Lutherans 500 years ago took a bar song, and you might have recognized that as the hymn that we sing every year, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." The religious leaders in Minnesota, especially mainline and progressive Christians, Lutherans and Presbyterians and United Methodists and Baptists, along with Black churches, have given us the template for nonviolent, determined, compassionate resistance to the ICE agents who are wreaking havoc in their neighborhoods. In early February, there were 500 people who gathered to learn old and new songs, to unite and to resist their fear. They will say, "I am afraid, but I need to do this anyway." Within weeks, the numbers doubled, and they doubled again. Over 2,000 people gathered at Westminster Presbyterian Church just a week ago in Minneapolis to sing before braving the cold. And the night after Alex Preddy was killed by Border Patrol agents, 1,400 people gathered at Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church. And while holding a candle flame, they learned to sing a new song. "I am not afraid. I will live for liberation, for I know why I am made." They sang that in a sanctuary in English, and they learned to sing it in Spanish as well. Society doesn't lose its humanity all at once. It loses it by small permissions, like the joke that you're like, "Oh, that hurt." but we don't challenge them because it's just a joke. Or maybe there's an insult waved away as that's someone's version of politics. Or maybe a suffering is explained as, well, that's policy. When dehumanization becomes familiar, it becomes acceptable and soon invisible. And silence in moments like this is not neutrality. Silence bends towards power. For when we refuse to speak, we consent to the moral downgrade of our shared, common humanity. Now, I don't know about you, but I've lost lots of sleep over these months, ruminating about the bad news that feels like a tormenting game of whack-a-mole. It's not just one, it's one after another, and I need some good news. I need this portrait of Jesus that John paints. Unlike the other Gospels, Jesus goes from a wedding in Cana straight to Jerusalem. It's not his last act like other Gospels. His very first act that John tells us is to go to Jerusalem, where he flips the tables of the corrupt system of money changing in the temple. This is good news of what he does. Jesus, implying God, will not tolerate the behavior of the authorities who profit off the poor and monetize common elements intended for worship. Later in this gospel, Jesus stands up for a woman publicly accused by powerful men for sexual improprieties, as if she acted alone. Or maybe it was their way to deflect blame. Regardless, it's good news to know that Jesus stands beside her. And when his friend Lazarus dies, Jesus weeps. Everything about his ministry tells us that our relationships matter, our grief matters, and that this life, all of this life, is sacred. And maybe that's when we need to remember the surprise of the gospel good news. Because it is surprising good news throughout in those places where we think it's only conflict. And maybe God is still doing that. Still taking what looks common and insufficient and making it overflow with extravagant goodness. Still nudging us to take up the lung in our airs and take up the air in our lungs and turn it into courage, solidarity, resistance, and hope. Shining lights into the parts of our world and into the parts of our hearts where shadows have lingered for too long. Good news often arrives the way it did in Cana, unexpectedly, when we think we're not ready or not enough, and oftentimes through something familiar. And maybe the invitation from today's story is simply this: to keep our eyes open and to see. And when the light breaks through, to trust that even in dark times, as God is working with us and for us. And maybe to believe that good news is still possible. Good news will surprise us. Good news will sustain us. And good news helps us see and believe. May it be so, my friends.